were steelworkers who are present here in the Rose Garden who say that this is a good thing, that they are excited, they are eager to see manufacturing start to get back up to speed here in the United States. But even they acknowledge that this is not going to be a on and off switch, right? This could take months, this could take years, this could take a while for this actually to get up and running. Now, the White House says, trust the president on this, that it will actually happen. But, Kana, look, I just got back from Wisconsin on our road trip there. We also stopped and we also spoke to business owners. I talked to an owner of an auto repair shop. He does repair about 90% of foreign vehicles, with these 25% tariffs set to go in today on all foreign cars and auto parts that are made outside of the United States. He says he's going to be increasing his prices by at least 25%. That's the bare minimum that they're going to go up, and that's going to drive up prices. He said over the last few days he has had customers come in trying to buy new cars because they're anticipating that more prices are going to start going up. And on top of that, he says just the unpredictability of all of this really impacts the bottom line, because you do have Americans out there that are trying to make sense of these on again, off again, now on again tariffs, and what exactly that could mean for their budgets, for their wallets, and for their own bottom lines back at home, Kana.
And no question, certainly a lot of Americans wondering about that. Rachel Scott, our thanks to you. I also want to bring in our chief White House correspondent, Mary Bruce, for us now as well. And Mary, really to elaborate there on what we're hearing from Rachel, as much as we learned today, there is still an overwhelming amount here of uncertainty of what this means for the future of Americans.
White House says because he is lenient, and as the president said there in the Rose Garden, because he is kind, he's only charging what they are describing as the worst offenders half of what they charge us. So there's this 10% baseline tariff on all countries, and then those who go beyond that, they are going to put that 50% rate tariff on them, half of what they charge us. But there are a lot of questions about how this is all going to play out, because make no mistake, these countries, many of them have already said they are going to retaliate. They are going to respond. We have heard that from the European Union, saying that they have a strong plan to retaliate. Mexico saying tomorrow they're going to announce their plan to respond. Many of these countries simply don't want to get into a tit-for-tat trade war with the U.S. And the president, of course, did leave open some wiggle room here, did leave open the possibility that they could negotiate, that countries could try and take actions to then lessen this tariff and this punishment. But what the president said he ultimately wants to see is for these countries to invest in the U.S. Again, though, economists caution that those investments take time to have their impact be felt, that it could be months, even years for production really to ramp up here at home on American soil. And the big question, the big X factor here is what happens in the meantime, because economists, of course, have cautioned that American consumers are going to bear the brunt of this, that costs are going to skyrocket on everything from clothing to produce, cars, electronics, you name it. And the White House, the president didn't mention that today. He didn't want to focus on that aspect of it. He's focused on the big picture and his adamant insistence that this will ultimately grow the American economy. He, of course, declaring this a declaration of economic independence. Kira.
He certainly did. An overall effort here to the day that American industry was reformed. That's what he's saying here. But as Mary Bruce just pointed out, there wasn't a lot of discussion about how this impacts everyday Americans and what's happening in their homes and at their kitchen table. And I want to bring in ABC News political director Avery Harper for more, because Avery, it is interesting that when the president was asked here about possible exemptions that might be talked about with other countries, it was surprising perhaps to see that this window for negotiation might be open just a bit. But Mary reiterated here that he would demand a drop in tariffs. He doesn't want the currencies manipulated, and he really wants these other countries to buy American goods. So is this perhaps leaving the door open?
We'll have to wait and see exactly what happens, but we heard the president talk about tariffs being a promise that he made on the campaign trail, and him saying that this is a promise kept. The fact is, when you look at public opinion, there isn't a really positive outlook here for the president in terms of sentiment around tariffs. When you look at a recent Marquette University poll, and I'm going to read from it, they asked if Americans thought that tariffs would help the economy, hurt the economy, or not make a difference. 58% dissent said it would hurt the economy. And you have to go back to what the top issues were as voters headed to the polls back in November. It was issues of the economy and inflation. And what that meant for people where they lived is things, the cost of living, things like the cost of housing, the cost of everyday items, things like groceries and putting gas in your car. And if we see those costs skyrocket for Americans, as many economists are expecting that they will after these tariffs are put in place, that is potentially a political liability for the president as Republicans head into a midterm election year and are hoping to retain their power in both the Senate and the House in order to push for Trump's agenda.
Right, you have to wonder how some of these Republicans in those swing districts will be answering to their constituents here in the coming months as they head towards midterms. Avery, thank you. ABC News Chief Business Correspondent Rebecca Jarvis here as well. And Rebecca, I know right away when these came out, my guess is your eye was on the stock market here because it closed a little higher perhaps than people thought. But man, when this announcement came, it changed.
I think there was some hope among analysts that perhaps these would be lighter than many assumed. And instead, what we have are very heavy tariffs from China, 34%, India, 26%, the EU, 20%, and then that baseline minimum of 10%. That means that unless there's a negotiation, and we have reason to believe that there very much will be these conversations happening behind the scenes, that these are very significant tariffs, the most significant that we've seen since the early 1900s levied on foreign countries. Now, the reason for these tariffs, the reason that this administration says they are levying these tariffs is for fairness. It is to bring more manufacturing back here to the United States. But that is a big challenge, and it's a long obstacle standing in their way because the types of decisions that businesses need to make to bring manufacturing back to here in the U.S., these are not light switch decisions. These are the kinds of decisions that take months, years, and billions of dollars in investment and commitments. And for many companies, they already have plans for what's coming 2, 3, 4 years down the road. They're now having to rethink those plans. I would also just point out that there are just certain realities of the marketplace that make this incredibly complicated to solve. For example, if you're a steel worker here in the United States, your average salary may be between $35 and $50. If you're that same steel worker in China or Mexico or India, you're making about $5 an hour. There's just these gigantic differentials, not only between what tariffs countries are imposing on us when they export their products here, but there's also giant differentials in terms of our quality of life here, how much we get paid, unions. All of these factors play in to the price of things that are created here in the United States, and therefore using something like tariffs to solve them is a tricky road ahead.
It certainly is, and you're right to point all of that out and spell it out so clearly for us. I'm sure you're going to have a busy day ahead as well tomorrow. Rebecca, thank you for being here with us. I also want to bring in Diane Swang. She's a KPMG chief economist. Diane, thank you for being here with us. I actually have quite a specific question for you. So forgive me, but I'm just really curious about the president specifically with the auto industry here. He's saying there's going to be a 25% tariff on all foreign-made auto. He brought up a member of the UAW who was saying in 6 months he might see some benefits. In a year he feels like he's going to see some benefits, and that he's excited about 3 years to come. Is that an overly optimistic timeline in your view?
It is, because auto plants take 3 to 5 years just to build, let alone get them staffed. And the other issue is that executive order tariffs, as we've been talking about the uncertainty out there, and the markets are down right now because of uncertainty. We don't know what's going to be negotiated away, but executive order tariffs are done via stroke of the pen, that they could easily be taken away that quickly, and people wouldn't want to locate here knowing that. We also know that historically, always the amount of the tariffs in terms of the welfare blow to the economy or the burden that they place on consumers is never made up for the industries that they protect.
And that is interesting. He's talking about perhaps revitalizing some dwindling, auto industries, but also building entirely new plants as well. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I also want to bring in our ABC News business reporter, Alexis Christoforous, as well. And Alexis, if I can, I also have another follow-up on the auto industry, because we've heard the president talk about a tax deduction if you were to purchase an American-made car. And he went on to say that essentially that would pay for itself. Again, a bit optimistic to talk about something like that happening so early on.
Yeah, Kana, and there is no such thing as an all-American-made car anymore. I mean, even GM and Ford, U.S. car makers, they make a lot of their auto parts come from Canada and Mexico. Some of the cars are actually assembled in plants that they have built over the border and then come back to the U.S. When a car is being built, it can go back and forth over the border several times. So what happens to those parts? What happens to those cars? Will they be exempt from the tariffs that the president is talking about? You're going to be hard pressed to be able to buy a car that's not touched in some way by these tariffs. And depending on the analyst you talk to, I actually spoke to an analyst, Dan Ives, over at Wedbush, whose area is autos. He says that a new car could now cost another $5,000 to $15,000 more because of these tariffs. I want to step away from the auto industry for a minute, because we got some news from the National Retail Federation just moments ago, and they are coming out now against these tariffs. The president of the NRF now saying that this is going to impact families, especially low-income families, and saying specifically these tariffs will have a disproportionate impact on local communities and will be particularly harmful to small retailers. Remember, the other foot hasn't dropped here, Kana, and that is the reciprocal tariffs. How will these countries respond? They, will look to negotiate with President Trump, we're assuming, but in the meantime, they may slap tariffs on many of our goods, which again puts pressure on many industries here in the U.S. What are those companies going to do? Probably have to raise prices on us, on U.S. consumers as well.
All right, we've heard from so many small businesses here at ABC News Live that have said it's really, really challenging, especially because many of them buy their goods from China. And so that is certainly, we're seeing that impact almost already as they try to prepare. I want to bring in ABC News senior White House correspondent Selena Wang for more on that, because we're starting to talk a little bit here about the ripple effect here, Selena. And certainly all eyes are on American families and small businesses, as Alexis just pointed out. But also, we don't really know how these other countries are going to react. We know that the president of Mexico said she doesn't want to do a tit for tat, but also there's some reporting here, Selena, about China trying to potentially coordinate its response to these tariffs with Japan and South Korea.
And Kana, that's such an important point, because so many businesses I've been talking to were hoping that they were going to get more clarity today, but we don't have that clarity. There's still so many questions, to your point about whether or not these tariffs are negotiable and how other countries are going to respond. To your point, Mexico says they're not going to turn this into a tit-for-tat trade war, but other countries may want to do so. And we're hearing now the reaction from analysts and experts as well, who say that this is really the end of an era, an end of this U.S. underpinned global trading system. And now with today's announcement, U.S. tariffs are now approaching levels not seen since the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930, which incited a global trade war and deepened the Great Depression. So a lot of anxiety and nerves. I've been speaking to small businesses today, Kana, who tell me that they're on pins and needles. They feel like that over the last few weeks, they've been making decisions in the dark. It's been hard for them to figure out how to price their products, how to adjust their supply chains if they don't know what the cost of their inputs are going to be tomorrow, next week, next month, not to mention the impact of those reciprocal tariffs. I spoke to one business owner today who runs a steel can company. He says he's already had to raise prices because of those 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum that already went into effect. He says some of his customers have already frozen their purchases. So President Trump here, Kana, really making a big political gamble here. He had campaigned, of course, on lowering inflation, on lowering costs for everyday Americans, but instead, this is most certainly going to raise prices for Americans at home.
All right, Selena Wang, our thanks to you. And coming up next here on ABC News Live, the once-in-a-generation weather event. It is triggering a tornado outbreak and putting millions of Americans at risk right now for historic flooding as well. Our chief meteorologist, Ginger Z, has the latest from the storm zone.
The news news never stops.
From Tampa, we are here tonight as Hurricane Milton has just made landfall.
The surge just keeps coming up.
Right on the border between Ukraine and Russia.
We're in artillery position about 2 miles away from Gaza.
And ABC News Live is right there everywhere.
We're not far from where this rally took place, so just stick with us here.
Traveling with the president to the U.S.-Mexico border.
Here in